Imagine this. You're wandering through a crowded market, and you suddenly freeze as you spot someone who looks like your shadow. The same stride, the same quirky grin, even the same unusual hair part. You lock eyes, and a gasp escapes. You're convinced you've met your long-lost twin in a living statue exhibit. But this isn't a prank or a hallucination. It's one of those rare miracles where identical twins, separated at birth, lead parallel lives until fate intersects their paths in the most mind-bending way. At first pass, you chalk it up to coincidence. Yet as you compare notes, details keep surfacing. Both of you prefer your coffee black, or both of you learn to play the guitar on an old nylon string. You share favourite childhood games, quirks that should be one in a million, and yet here you are standing face to face. The sheer precision of these matches shatters your sense of randomness, hinting that genetics weave possibilities far beyond ordinary chance. Take the renowned case of the Minnesota twins, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, who were adopted by different families just weeks apart. Each boy grew up unaware of the other, yet when they reunited in their late 30s, the parallels were jaw-dropping. Both had named their first pets Toy. Each had a childhood habit of studying mechanical gadgets under the kitchen lamp, and both chain-smoked the same brand of cigarettes. Even their daily routines lined up. Morning eggs, afternoon nap, evening news. Psychologically, these stories force us to reconsider nature versus nurture. Twin studies have long fascinated researchers because identical twins share all their genes, yet often end up in entirely different environments. The uncanny overlaps remind us that genetics can steer preferences, from the foods we crave to the hobbies we pursue. Yet environment still shapes our habits and beliefs, sculpting our unique narratives. When separated twins converge on the same lifestyles, it reveals the subtle power of an inherited blueprint, quietly guiding behavior in ways we scarcely appreciate. But there's more to it than biology. When we encounter such rare coincidences, it awakens something primal inside us. Psychologist Carl Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful patterns that link seemingly unrelated events. Our brains are hardwired for pattern seeking, so when twins separated at birth recite the same childhood rhyme or tattoo the same symbol, it feels like a nod from the universe. These moments nudge us to suspend disbelief and marvel at the hidden threads connecting human stories across time and space. These twin tales also tap into a deeper human yearning for belonging. We weave stories of shared birthdays or uncanny life parallels because we crave confirmation that we aren't alone in the world. Each revelation of a twin's secret life stirs a hopeful thrill. Perhaps our own echoes are waiting just around the corner. It's as if beneath the surface of everyday reality, there's a hidden network of connections linking us all, patiently waiting for discovery. Beyond the headline-grabbing drama, these twin reunions invite us to rethink how we define coincidence. Each shared laugh, each mirrored habit, underscores a sense of kinship that defies ordinary logic. They remind us that beneath our everyday routines lies a tapestry woven from ancestry and chance, where the boundaries between strangers blur. These stories teach us that sometimes the universe conspires to bring people together, not by accident, but by design, inviting us to look for the extraordinary within the seemingly mundane. In the end, these twin tales aren't just fascinating oddities. They're mirrors reflecting our shared humanity. They invite us to approach each new encounter with curiosity, ready to spot the spark of familiarity in a stranger's eyes. When you next see someone whose story feels uncannily like your own, pause and embrace that moment of wonder. It might just be the universe whispering that we are more connected, more intricate, and more magical than we ever dared imagine. Late one night, Siblings Sarah and Lily drifted off to sleep side by side in their childhood bedroom. When they woke before dawn, they were stunned to find they had shared the same dream, chasing red balloons through an endless field beneath a violet sky. That moment, when private visions aligned perfectly, felt like a glitch in reality. It hinted at something you might not expect. Our dreams, those hidden theatres of memory and imagination, can sometimes sync up with another mind. This phenomenon, often called synced dreams, challenges the idea that our inner worlds are sealed off from one another. It suggests that beneath the surface of everyday life, our subconscious minds may whisper back and forth. You might imagine that dreaming is the most solitary act imaginable, but synced dreams reveal it as a surprising shared experience. On the surface, it feels like magic. Psychologically, it speaks to deep connections born from shared moments, emotions, and even instinct. Consider a story from a small coastal town where lifelong friends Emma and Zoe both reported a dream of sailing on a paper boat past glowing lanterns. The dream seemed too detailed and too specific to be coincidence. Over coffee, they pieced together scene by scene, from the quiet lapping of water to the distant call of an owl. Their shared dream had been the stage for a conversation neither had planned, reigniting their bond in a way no waking chat could match. Psychologists have long been fascinated by why these coincidences feel so uncanny. Carl Jung coined the term collective unconscious to describe an invisible realm of shared symbols and memories that reside in all of us. In that frame, synced dreams are not random accidents, but echoes of universal archetypes stirring beneath our personal experiences. When two people share similar life stories, environments, or deep worries, their minds may draw on the same symbolic language in sleep. That red balloon or paper boat becomes a vessel carrying shared hopes or fears. At the same time, our brains are masters of pattern recognition and meaning-making. We tend to remember the few times our dreams aligned and forget the countless nights they did not. This cognitive bias magnifies the rarity into something miraculous. In reality, most synced dreams revolve around simple themes: flying, falling, or lost places, all of which tap into basic human experiences. Yet, when those basic themes emerge in the same way for two people, it feels as though the universe has sent a private message. The odds of dreaming the same detailed scenario independently are astronomically low, but syncing in broad strokes is more common than you might think. Psychologically, this syncing can serve a powerful social function. When humans sense a deep connection, it builds trust. Shared dreams become stories people retell as proof of an invisible bond. They remind us that beneath our individual thoughts, we inhabit a common landscape shaped by emotions, collective memories, and perhaps a dash of mystery. In our waking hours, synchronized experiences bind communities, singing together, rituals, even collective sighs at challenging moments. Synced dreams extend that unity into sleep, blurring the line between what feels private and what feels communal. They invite us to consider how much of our inner life is really ours alone. If our dreams can harmonize, maybe our hearts can too, reaching beyond words and daylight limitations. Synced dreams may never yield a perfect scientific explanation, but they offer something just as valuable: a sense of awe and connection. When the mind wanders into shared territory, it reminds us that we are never wholly alone in the dark. And in that quiet realm, between sleep and waking, we might discover that our most private moments are also the ones that bind us most deeply. On a bustling street in Mumbai, you might catch sight of someone who looks so much like you. It feels as if you've stepped in front of a mirror. The same deep-set eyes, the same gentle curve of the chin, Even the way their shoulders slope echoes your own posture. But this stranger is not a reflection. They hold no memory of your life, no hint of your past. That surreal moment where familiarity and alienness collide is the essence of a doppelganger reunion. In that heartbeat, your sense of uniqueness trembles. One part of you senses kinship, while another recoils at the strangeness. Yet these meetings are neither magic nor mythology. They are the outcome of vast numbers and the extraordinary workings of human perception. When the improbably rare aligns with the finely tuned face recognition centers in your brain, you experience the uncanny, a whisper from probability itself. Consider Sarah wandering into a quiet cafe in London, nursing a cup of steeped tea. Across from her sat Lucy, who matched her hairstyle, her freckle pattern, and even the tilt of her head as she listened. After an awkward pause, they exchanged names and discovered they shared no common ancestry, yet they both worked as graphic designers and had a fondness for acoustic music. Laughing together, they marveled at how two lives half a world apart could suddenly intersect so perfectly. Psychologically, you are wired to detect faces. From infancy, your brain devotes a special network dedicated to cataloguing facial features, a sort of mental face space, where each person you meet is a point on a vast map. When someone plots too close to your own point, your neural circuits perk up, triggering a thrill or a chill. This is akin to what robotics researchers call the uncanny valley. Entities that look almost human provoke a visceral reaction. In a doppelganger encounter, your brain struggles to reconcile identical features with a stranger's life story. Another striking tale comes from two men named James, one living in Kansas and the other in South Africa. They were introduced through an online group, fascinated by uncanny coincidences, and discovered not only did they share the same name, but also the same birth date and career as carpenters. When they finally met via video call, the shock was mutual. Every gesture, every eyebrow arch mirrored the other's. That double discovery, name, face, profession, felt like fate giving a wink. Yet it was simply the convergence of chance and scale. With more than 7 billion people in the world, finding a stranger who aligns with your key facial landmarks might feel impossible. Yet, scientists estimate the odds of two unrelated individuals sharing closely matching facial vectors to be about 1 in 100 million. That figure may seem vanishingly small, but when multiplied across billions of lives, it transforms rare events into remarkable realities. It reminds you that within the vast tapestry of humanity, patterns will form, threads will cross, and doppelgangers will meet. Rather than recoil in disbelief, you can choose to see these reunions as invitations to wonder. Each collision of almost identical faces highlights our shared humanity and the invisible web connecting strangers. It is an opportunity to pause and marvel at the way probability and perception conspire to bring lives into mirror alignment. In that pause, you find both humility and astonishment. So next time a stranger's face stops you in your tracks, let curiosity guide you. Smile, extend a greeting, and share a moment of marvel. In the brief space where your life intersects with theirs, you glimpse the extraordinary hidden in plain sight. And as you walk away, you carry with you a renewed sense that within this vast, unpredictable world, coincidences can forge unexpected connections, reminding you that being one of a kind is a choice as much as a trait. Your coffee is still warm as you open the email announcing your DNA results. You expect a map of regions, a list of percentages, maybe a handful of distant cousins. Instead, you see a name you've never heard, labelled as your half-sibling. A complete stranger. Your heart skips a beat. This is the essence of the DNA lottery match. When you send off a saliva sample, you're stepping into a vast experiment of chance and inheritance. Every child inherits half of each parent's DNA, but exactly which segments come down is entirely random. That randomness can make you share nearly 50% of your genome with someone you've never met. In a world of billions, the odds of such a close match can feel like finding a needle in a planet-sized haystack. Consider Jana, adopted as an infant, who turned to a popular genealogy service and discovered not one but 7 half-siblings scattered across 3 continents. One lives in Australia teaching art. Another runs a coffee farm in Brazil. They share the same sperm donor. Their first phone calls were full of laughter and disbelief. Then came tears as identity shifted and roots broadened. Psychologists call this a genetic surprise, an unfolding of hidden chapters in one's life story. On another occasion, 2 businessmen started chatting on a flight from London to New York. They joked about the stresses of corporate life. Hours later, each logged into the same DNA app on his phone and discovered they shared nearly 25% of their DNA, like half-cousins. They laughed, compared family trees, and mapped out where their great-grandparents might overlap. That chance conversation turned into an impromptu global reunion that neither expected. Science explains these uncanny encounters. During reproduction, chromosomes shuffle and recombine in unique ways, like riffle, shuffling 2 decks of cards. No 2 deals are alike. Genetic drift and pedigree collapse mean that family lines can intersect after generations apart. And donor conception and secret adoptions leave hidden branches waiting to be rediscovered. Recent studies suggest that within a few hundred years, most people with European ancestry share at least 1,000 common ancestors. These shared ancestors leave traces in our DNA, waiting for the right algorithm to uncover them. The psychology behind these revelations is profound. When strangers become family by genetics, personal narratives expand. A single DNA match can trigger a cascade of emotions: joy, bewilderment, grief, hope. It invites questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? And answers. We are part of a living network that stretches beyond surnames and borders. In research on identity formation, finding biological kin often boosts self-esteem and belonging, even when it complicates existing family dynamics. At a broader level, DNA lottery matches remind us how interconnected we truly are. Through centuries of migration, secret births, and shared humanity, our genomes carry echoes of countless lives. That realization can be humbling. It can shift our perspective from individualism to collective tapestry. No one is truly alone. When you finally see photos of a newly found relative, you recognize your own features mirrored in their face. That moment of recognition, eyes, smile, mannerisms, is both surreal and grounding. It shows that science can bridge gaps that geography, language, or time once created. A DNA lottery match is more than data on a screen. It's proof that chance and biology collaborate to create relationships beyond imagination. It's a reminder that family can be hidden in plain sight, waiting for a test to reveal itself. And it gently urges us to embrace the possibility that strangers might be our closest kin, connected by the curious role of genetic dice. Ultimately, each new match is a chance to rewrite our understanding of who we are and where we come from. It feels like no matter how many times we christen a vessel with promises of power or perseverance, the ocean has a mind of its own. You launch a ship named for giants, and you watch it list against a silent night. You bless another with a name meant to inspire endurance, and then stare at ice where it once sailed. Across centuries, certain ship names seem to carry a curse, weaving tragedy into their very syllables. But is this dark coincidence or something deeper? Some of the most infamous maritime disasters share more than stormy seas and flailing hulls. They share names that stick in the mind like a cold chill. In maritime lore, renaming a ship without a proper ceremony is said to invite disaster. The superstition points to the idea that a name holds identity and fate. Psychologically, this belief taps into a labeling effect. We treat the name as a prophecy, and every sign of trouble feels like proof. Yet, when we look closer, the patterns reveal the quirks of human perception as much as the wrath of the waves. Take the Titanic. Built to be unsinkable, she was named for the Titans of Greek myth, creatures of immense strength. On her maiden voyage, she struck an iceberg and sank beneath the North Atlantic on April 15, 1912. The irony of such a proud name meeting such a swift end still fascinates you. It's not just a story of steel and ice. It's a reminder of how hubris and tragedy can entwine, leaving a name forever shadowed by loss. Then there's the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine found drifting off the Azores on December 4, 1872, with no one aboard. Originally commissioned as the Amazon, she was renamed Mary Celeste for her new owner, only to become the ghost ship immortalized in legend. No wreckage, no bodies, no clear explanation. The empty deck and untouched belongings transformed her name into a symbol of mystery and dread, fueling every retelling with the sense that some names simply call forth the uncanny. You also have Endurance, the ship Sir Ernest Shackleton dared to trust with his trans-Antarctic expedition. He named her after his expedition motto, "By endurance we conquer." Yet the vessel was crushed by pack ice and sank beneath the shifting floes in 1917. The name that was meant to embody perseverance became an echo of loss amid the drifting ice. That stark contrast between intention and outcome magnifies the sense that names can summon fate. Centuries earlier, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden christened the warship Vasa in 1628 to honour his dynasty. She set sail in Stockholm harbour under a gilded bow and sank within minutes, capsizing before she cleared the wharf. The vessel that bore a royal name became an enduring symbol of pride undone. When the Vasa was salvaged centuries later, she carried the tale of a kingdom's ambition and the sea's indifference, all encoded in a single name. Psychologically, these tales tap into apophenia, our tendency to perceive patterns in randomness, and confirmation bias, where we remember the hits and forget the misses. Thousands of ships sail under unremarkable names without incident, yet the ones with dramatic stories dominate our lore. Research in narrative psychology suggests you pay more attention to stories that echo human drama and irony. Maritime superstitions about christening and renaming add another layer, hinting at self-fulfilling prophecies. When you rename a ship without ritual, sailors warn it invites misfortune. Yet each cautionary tale is as much about human belief as about the deep. In the end, the sea doesn't answer to names, but you do. These cursed monikers remind you that naming is an act of hope and a projection of meaning. When tragedy strikes a vessel with a resonant name, it feels like fate speaking in thunder. Yet perhaps the real power lies in our stories, in the way we weave names into legends. So next time you hear a ship's name, listen for the tide of myth beneath it, and remember that the most compelling curses live in the currents of human imagination. Imagine twilight settling over two distant skylines, each bathed in a fading glow. In one city, a solitary figure stands on a ledge high above the streets. In another, someone miles away occupies the very same vantage point. At the same moment, they both step forward. The method is identical, the timing is uncanny, and the silence that follows echoes across continents. These are the stories of mirrored suicides, coincidences that seem to defy chance and ask us to look deeper into the hidden patterns of human life. Mirrored suicides are more than tragic headlines. They are eerie reflections of one another, separate acts, woven into a single tapestry of coincidence. Psychologically, these events tap into our innate drive to find meaning in randomness. We're pattern seekers by nature, wired to connect the dots even when they don't belong together. Yet, sometimes what feels like deliberate design may simply be the collision of rare probabilities. Still, it is hard to dismiss the chill that runs down your spine when two strangers unknown to each other make the same choice at the same hour, in the same way. Consider the case of two young women living hundreds of miles apart, who both chose to end their lives in the identical manner. Each left behind a note describing an overwhelming sense of isolation, and each selected the same phrase to sign off. Hours later, as investigators pieced together their final hours, they discovered the striking parallel, down to the choice of words and to the date, which happened to be the anniversary of a long-forgotten tragedy neither had witnessed. In moments like these, coincidence feels less like happenstance and more like a silent dialogue across space. Psychologically, this phenomenon brushes against the concept of synchronicity, a term coined by Carl Jung to describe meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect. Synchronicity suggests that events may align in ways that reveal an underlying order or shared unconscious connection. While science demands cautious interpretation, reminding us that extraordinary clusters will occur in a world of billions, our fascination with these mirrored tragedies points to a deeper yearning. The comfort of believing we are part of something larger, something that whispers in patterns beyond our immediate perception. Another haunting example took place in two small towns separated by a mountain range. On a quiet afternoon, a man in one town and a woman in the other both chose the same type of bridge to leap from, each wearing a coat of the very same colour. Locals shuddered at the news, noting the almost ritualistic symmetry. When asked why they chose that particular bridge, neither spoke of its history or view. They each described a fleeting impulse, an inexplicable pull toward that spot. Though there was no shared conversation or coordinated plan, the mirrored action created a bond between two grieving communities, as if grief itself had reached across the divide. Beyond the unsettling drama of such stories lies an insight into how our minds interpret coincidence. Psychologically, when we encounter a rare event that aligns so perfectly, we assign it significance, sometimes even a sense of destiny. Our brains are wired to elevate anomalies, to keep us alert to possible threats or opportunities. We scan for connections as a survival tactic. Yet, with mirrored suicides, the outcome is sorrow rather than safety. The same mechanism that once protected us, pattern recognition, now spotlights tragedy in stark relief. These mirrored acts also remind us of our shared vulnerability. Each person who stands alone on that precipice carries an unseen weight, and the fact that another soul somewhere else does the same underscores a universal ache. It invites us to reach out, to recognize that isolation can be mirrored in the hearts of strangers. In that sense, the coincidence becomes a mirror for our collective need for connection and understanding. Mirrored suicides leave us with a question. What invisible threads bind us together so that our darkest moments can align like twin stars in different skies? Maybe there is no simple answer, and perhaps science will never fully explain every coincidence that breaks our sense of randomness. But in bearing witness to these uncanny parallels, we are reminded of the invisible architecture of human experience. And in that awareness, there is a fragile hope that even in the echo of tragedy, we can find a reason to reach out and say, "You are not alone." In a dusty attic somewhere across the North Atlantic, a weathered manuscript sits waiting. It paints a world eerily familiar, screens glowing in every palm, algorithms shaping what we see, whispered rumours crossing invisible waves. That was not a documentary. It was a novel written a century before smartphones existed. From the flicker of a page under candlelight, you can glimpse tomorrow's blueprint. Literary predictions aren't mere flights of fancy. They are invitations to gaze into the murky horizon of human possibility. When you turn the page, you're not just following a story, you're strolling through an echo of tomorrow. Writers channel collective anxieties, hopes, and blind spots, crafting scenarios that feel absurd until you wake up in them. Psychologically speaking, these predictions tap into our pattern-seeking nature and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we might end up. Take Jules Verne, for example, scribbling about voyages beneath the sea long before modern submarines carved their path through ocean trenches. He imagined metal tubes oozing through dark currents, crewed by hardy souls staring through pressure-proof glass. At the time, his vision seemed wildly speculative. Yet a few decades later, humankind descended into the abyss. His thrill a second hand, his descriptions precise enough to rival scientific diagrams. That uncanny resonance isn't coincidence. It's a mirror reflecting our restless drive toward exploration. It's not about pure foresight, but about witnessing the currents beneath the cultural surface. When a storyteller recognizes a tension between ambition and consequence, they map a route others will follow. Psychologically, this is grounded in the idea of collective unconscious, archetypal impulses swirling beneath individual minds. Whether it is the challenge of conquering nature's depths or the lure of artificial minds, authors sense these currents before they solidify into technology. Consider Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. One sketched a serene nightmare of pleasure and control, and the other painted a harsh dystopia where surveillance wore every face. Both novels arrived in the same decade, each dissecting power with surgical precision. It's not just that they predicted gadgets and policies, they spotted the subtle alchemy of language and authority. In their narratives, slogans roll off tongues like incantations, and reality recedes behind carefully curated images. Such stories warn us what we might forget when dazzled by novelty. As we move deeper into the 20th century, William Gibson concocted cyberspace before we knew the term. Margaret Atwood chronicled climate collapse, while scientists still whispered in corridors. Their fiction smells of lab chemicals and wildfires at once, a paradox of dread and fascination. The coincidence lies in convergence. When real events echo fiction, it feels as though someone wrote the blueprint for the future and left it tucked in dusty bookstore corners. Every time reality catches up to fiction, it reminds us how malleable our future remains and how much power stories hold. Beyond the gadgets and policies, literary predictions carry an emotional payload. They invite us to wrestle with ethics as new worlds dawn. Psychologically, this works because fiction lowers our defensive shields. We feel safe encountering radical ideas in a story before confronting them in life. This softens the blow of change and primes us to imagine alternative paths. When a novel shows a world divided by invisible lines, you suddenly notice barriers in your own neighborhood. This dialogue between imagination and reality shapes our culture. Inventors pore over speculative fiction for inspiration. Activists borrow slogans from prophetic lines. Readers debate not only right and wrong, but what might be. Predictions in literature become a living conversation about how we build tomorrow and who we choose to be along the way. Next time you pull a volume from the shelf, look for the faint echo of your own world. Notice how a turn of phrase can tremble with unspoken possibility. Literary predictions aren't just coincidences waiting to surprise you. They're gentle warnings and bright invitations. In the silence between words, you'll find the outlines of futures yet unwritten. Most people scrolling through history treat presidential trivia as harmless oddities. But when you land on Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, something clicks. Two leaders separated by a century share such an uncanny constellation of alignments that it feels like time itself hit a copy command. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy won his in 1960. Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. And that is just the beginning of what everyone now refers to as presidential parallels. Presidential parallels aren't just clever party anecdotes. They're a reminder that our brains are wired to find patterns in the chaos of history. Psychologically, we call this tendency apophenia, a hunger to connect the dots and make sense of events across time. When coincidences line up in ways that feel almost scripted, they tug at our sense of narrative, convincing us that there must be a hidden thread weaving through decades. Whether you see cosmic design or random chance, these mirror moments between Lincoln and Kennedy speak to how we seek meaning in the unexpected. For example, both presidents were elected to Congress in years ending with 60. Lincoln in 1846, Kennedy in 1946. Each rode into office amid turbulent times. Lincoln on the eve of Civil War, Kennedy during the height of the Cold War. Both spoke passionately about unity and progress, stoking hopes in a divided nation. Their legacies, however, share a darker echo. Each was assassinated on a Friday, shot in the head while seated beside their wives. Lincoln fell in Ford's Theatre. Kennedy was struck in a Lincoln convertible manufactured by Ford. These alignments cascade across details so specific, you might wonder if someone planted clues for later discovery. Dig deeper and you find more. Lincoln's private secretary carried the name Kennedy. Decades later, Kennedy's private aide was named Lincoln. Each president was succeeded by a Johnson who was born exactly 100 years apart. Andrew Johnson in 1808 and Lyndon Johnson in 1908. These echoes don't stop at names and dates. They form a tapestry of coincidences, weaving personal, political, and tragic threads into a story that feels almost too precise to be random. Psychologically, the appeal of these presidential mirror images lies in our brain's bias for narrative coherence. Evolutionarily, spotting patterns helped our ancestors anticipate danger, so today we still unconsciously knit together disparate events into meaningful stories. When two iconic figures share names, fatefully timed births, and mirrored fates, our minds register an almost cinematic storyline. Cognitive science calls this confirmation bias. Once we notice one parallel, we start seeking more, like detectives assembling clues. That relentless search for connectivity makes the Lincoln-Kennedy parallels stick in our memory far more vividly than any standalone fact. In that sense, these alignments tell us as much about our psychology as they do about presidential history. Beyond Lincoln and Kennedy, presidential parallels appear in other corners of history, inviting us to pause and reflect. Three early presidents, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe, all drifted from the world on July 4th, marking Independence Day with a final farewell. That shared date amplifies their intertwined legacies and reminds us how temporal markers can take on symbolic weight. When coincidences land on moments we already deem significant, they resonate more deeply, coalescing into collective myth. This phenomenon mirrors the way we celebrate anniversaries and milestones. Dates become anchors for memory. In the end, these presidential echoes do more than entertain trivia buffs. They offer a mirror for how we construct meaning around people and events, stitching together time with threads of serendipity. Ultimately, presidential parallels remind us that history isn't just a dry ledger of dates and names. It's a living tapestry woven by human stories, random twists, and the patterns our minds can't help but trace. Whether you chalk these alignments up to chance, cognitive bias, or something more mysterious, they spark curiosity and deepen our connection to the past. Each coincidence becomes a portal, inviting you to look closer at the moments that shape our world. Picture this. A finely printed novel from 1898, pages yellowed at the edges, telling of a grand ocean liner called the Titan. You hold the book in your hands, feeling the weight of its story. It describes a vessel touted as unsinkable, steaming through the icy waters of the North Atlantic. In an eerie twist of fate, this fictional Titan collides with an iceberg on a cold April night. Lifeboats are scarce. More than half the passengers will perish. Only years later would you learn of this uncanny parallel in our own history. Often we shrug at coincidences, chalking them up to chance. But some alignments are too precise to dismiss. One such coincidence stretches across time, like a thread connecting fiction and reality. The novel, originally titled Futility and later reissued as Wreck of the Titan, was penned by Morgan Robertson, a former sailor whose intimate knowledge of the sea bore through his prose. In his book, he described a ship of 800 feet, carrying 2,000 souls, with lifeboats for only half that number. Does this narrative feel familiar? In 1912, the Titanic, nearly identical in grandeur and hubris, met its icy doom under almost the same circumstances. Recounting these details feels like stepping into a dream, where the lines between imagination and history blur. Psychologically, this phenomenon ties closely to Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy explanation through cause and effect alone. When we encounter such alignments, words from a century gone by that echo real events, our minds ignite with wonder. We seek patterns, yearn for meaning in the noise of random events, and find ourselves marveling at possibilities that slip through the seams of logic. Consider how Robertson's fictional Titan had a single wireless room for distress calls, much like the Marconi towers aboard the Titanic. He set his story in the month of April, described the same tragic time frame, and even placed the collision at approximately 41 degrees north latitude. Readers at the time saw a gripping sea tale. Only in hindsight did they recognize the precision with which Robertson charted a route of disaster. It's a striking case that makes us question the boundaries of foresight. How could an author, writing in peaceful days of calm seas, so accurately envision the failings of human engineering and the ruthless power of nature? Yet perhaps there is simplicity behind the mystery. Robertson was no stranger to maritime life. A seasoned sailor and wreck hunter, he knew how ocean liners navigated ice fields and the hubris that accompanied the age of steel ships. His experiences may have informed a keen projection of worst-case scenarios based on real trends of his era. Psychologically, our brain's pattern recognition can sometimes feel prophetic when colliding with fate. We remember the hits and forget the misses, focusing on the eerie echoes and sidelining the countless shipwrecks that never inspired fiction. Still, the legend of the Titan persists as one of the most mind-bending coincidences in maritime lore. It reminds us that fiction can sometimes peer into the future, sketching outlines of events yet to unfold. When art brushes up against reality in such vivid strokes, it humbles us. We are followers of narratives, drawn to stories that resonate, ready to marvel when words and deeds align in ways we never dreamed. In the end, the story of Robertson's Titan urges a quiet reflection on how we perceive fate and foresight. It suggests that beneath every tapestry of time, a hidden thread may bind imagination to outcome. And even if we never unravel why this particular novel bore such an accurate echo, the coincidence itself stands as proof that sometimes truth is stranger and more astonishing than fiction. Imagine flipping through a century-old novella and reading about an ocean liner called the Titan, heralded as unsinkable, that strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic on an April voyage and vanishes beneath icy waves. It reads like dramatic fiction. Yet, 14 years later, On an April night in 1912, a vessel named the Titanic nearly mirrored every chilling detail: 882 feet of steel, too few lifeboats, and those same frigid currents pulling souls into the deep. But this isn't magic or prophecy. It's life imitating art in the most startling way. You might read a story and shrug it off as pure fantasy, yet when a plot twist leaps from printed page into real headlines, your sense of reality trembles. We think of novels, cartoons, and tall tales as safe realms, but occasionally imagination escapes ink and celluloid, blurring the line between fiction and fate. Morgan Robertson was no seer, just a seasoned maritime writer who released his novella Futility in 1898. He sketched the Titan, 800 feet long, built for speed, with lifeboats for only a fraction of its passengers, and sent it on a maiden voyage in April. When the Titanic collided with an iceberg 14 years later, survivors noted everything from the ship's size and speed to its dire lifeboat shortage. Robertson denied clairvoyance, yet his fiction and history became inseparable echoes. For a different shock, tune into The Simpsons episode Bart to the Future, which aired on March 19, 2000. In that playful vision, we see Lisa Simpson swearing in as the first straight female president, inheriting a budget crisis from a predecessor named Donald Trump. It was a satirical wink at celebrity politics. 16 years later, in 2016, a businessman named Donald Trump won the real White House, and suddenly a cartoon gag felt like eerie foreshadowing. Then there are the odd Lockwood tales. In 1888, Ingersoll Lockwood penned Baron Trump's marvelous underground journey, featuring a young aristocrat named Baron, guided by a mentor called Don. His follow-up, The Last President, describes election night chaos in New York City, and even names a cabinet official called Pence. Those books predate any modern Trump dynasty by more than a century, yet their characters and events line up like inscrutable signposts to our present day. Long before rocket engineers saw stars, Jules Verne sketched a lunar expedition in prose. In 1865, his novel From the Earth to the Moon envisioned a giant cannon on Florida's coast, firing a projectile into orbit with a splashdown in the Pacific. He described weather reports, nautical coordinates, and a recovery ship waiting offshore. Decades later, Apollo missions lifted off from Florida and splashed down near Earth's ocean, leaving historians marveling at how fiction laid the groundwork for reality. Our fascination with these uncannily parallel tales taps into something fundamental. Psychologically, we are pattern seekers, wired to connect dots where others see randomness. When you stumble on a dusty paperback or watch a cartoon gag come true, it feels like a neon sign flickering in the dark. What does it mean when stories we once dismissed as fiction snap into focus as reality? These moments remind us how thin the veil is between what we dream and what unfolds. Fiction becomes a bridge rather than a barrier when its stories slip into our world. It proves that creative minds do not merely entertain, they forecast, inspire, and sometimes presage history in the most mind-bending ways. So the next time you lose yourself in a novel or laugh through a speculative tale, remember that imagination can leap the gap into reality. When make-believe comes to life, it invites you to embrace the wondrous mystery that binds our stories to our lives. A rare book collector once walked into a second-hand shop just to escape the rain. Nothing fancy, just an old storefront with the faint smell of paper and time. He flipped through a few paperbacks, passed over a stack of dusty encyclopedias, and then something caught his eye. A worn leather binding with no title. Inside, handwritten pages, dozens of them. A manuscript, nearly a century old. He bought it for $5. 2 weeks later, out of curiosity, he shared a few photos of it online. And within hours, something unexpected happened. A stranger messaged him. Not just to identify the handwriting, but to say, I think that's my grandfather's. He lost it before I was born. It sounds too perfect to be true, like a movie waiting to happen. But here's the thing, coincidences like this are real. They're not as rare as we think. What's rare is noticing them. Psychologists call this pattern recognition. Our brains are wired to find meaning, to connect the dots, even when there's no roadmap. Most of the time, these little overlaps pass us by. A name you hear twice in one day. A song that plays right when you're thinking of someone. But sometimes the dots connect so clearly that it shakes you a little. You get the feeling, this wasn't random. In research, there's something called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. When you learn about something new, and suddenly you see it everywhere. It's not magic, it's your brain tuning in. The same thing happens with coincidence. When you start paying attention, you notice just how many invisible threads are around us all the time. Let's go back to that manuscript. When the collector met the grandson, they traced the history together. Turns out the original writer was a war reporter in the 1930s. He'd carried the notebook across countries, through bombings, heartbreak, and peace treaties. He mailed it once to a friend, but it never arrived. Somehow, it ended up buried in a box in a London attic, forgotten through decades and generations, until it was sold in a house clearance. Until the rain drove someone into the right shop. Until it came back to the family who'd never even seen it. That's the beauty of coincidence. It's not always flashy. It's not always immediate, but it often holds something we didn't know we needed. Closure, curiosity, connection. And sometimes it reminds us that while life is chaotic, it isn't always random, that we're part of something larger than our choices and our plans. That stories can find their way home, even after being lost for a lifetime. The next time something strange clicks into place, pause for a second. Let it surprise you. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are just meant to be noticed, because what looks like chance might just be life whispering, "You're exactly where you need to be." It sounds made up, but it's real. In 1971, a plane took off from Portland, Maine, headed for Boston. It never made it. It crashed. Out of all the passengers, just one person survived, a man named Ernie. He climbed from the wreckage, shaken but alive. No one could have imagined that 3 years later, almost to the day, another plane on nearly the same route would also go down. This time near the coast of Maine, and somehow only one person survived again. A young man named Neil. 2 plane crashes, 3 years apart, same region, same outcome. 1 survivor each. Here's the part that bends the mind. Ernie and Neil were twins. They weren't on the plane together. They weren't even in the same city. They didn't book flights together. Each one happened to be on a different plane, years apart, that crashed. And each one happened to be the sole survivor of their flight. When people hear this story, the reactions split in 2. Some try to rationalize it, statistics, probabilities, odds. Others just sit in the quiet awe of it, because no math formula captures what it feels like to imagine 2 people born from the same womb, walking away alone from 2 separate disasters. Twice. Psychologists say humans are meaning-making machines. When something improbable happens, our instinct is to search for a reason. Fate, destiny, divine intervention, a glitch in the matrix. But maybe the power of stories like this isn't in what they mean. It's in how they stop us, how they make us pause mid-scroll, mid-sentence and think, how? Not every mystery has to be solved. Sometimes the point is simply to let the mystery exist, to hold space for the impossible. Because those rare, strange moments, when reality refuses to behave, remind us that life doesn't always follow the rules we think it should. And maybe that's what makes these stories so sticky. Not just because they're rare, but because in a world so often ruled by logic and routine, they crack open a little door for wonder. Twin survivors, separate crashes, no explanation, just 2 brothers pulled from the wreckage twice. It started with a picnic blanket, a bored couple, and a clear night sky. They had almost skipped the outing entirely. A long week, a few unresolved arguments, and the quiet exhaustion that builds when life gets too loud. But something pulled them outside anyway. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. They lay in silence under the stars. Then it happened. One streak of light, then another. A meteor shower, unannounced and unexpected. They didn't know the odds. How rare it was to catch it in that sliver of sky at that exact time without warning. But the silence broke. They laughed, spoke, apologized, remembered why they liked each other in the first place. It sounds like a romantic fluke, a cosmic accident. But psychology would call it something else, a disruption event. Our brains are wired for patterns, routines, plans, expectations. But sometimes the thing that shifts our perspective isn't something planned. It's the disruption, the strange timing, the sudden beauty, the meteor shower that jars us out of autopilot and into presence. Coincidences like these don't always come with flashing signs. They arrive quietly. A missed bus that leads to meeting someone new. A book falling off a shelf that turns into the next chapter of your life. The moment you get lost and end up somewhere better than you planned. Psychologically, our minds search for meaning in these events. It's called patternicity, the tendency to find significance in the seemingly random. But sometimes meaning isn't a stretch, it's real, because it changes us. The story we tell shifts. We see our choices differently. We remember what matters. There's something grounding about that. That your life can pivot, not because of a master plan, but because you stayed one moment longer. Or looked up at the right time. Sometimes the stars align. Sometimes you align with them. And maybe the most mind-blowing part isn't that coincidences happen. It's that we recognize them. That a part of us, deep down, is waiting for something to remind us. This matters. Stay here. Don't miss this. So the next time something odd clicks into place, someone you weren't supposed to see, a message you needed to hear, a path you never planned to take, pause. It might just be your meteor shower. It started as a mistake, a lost catalogue number, a mislabeled crate. A museum in Italy shipping out its loaned inventory and realizing one painting just wasn't theirs. It should have ended there, a quiet note in an archive. But the thing about some stories, they don't like staying buried. The painting was a 19th century portrait. Not famous, not valuable by market standards, but when an American museum received it decades ago, no one questioned its origin. It was part of a bulk donation. Donors respected, paperwork clean, until someone looked closer. That someone was a new registrar, cataloguing pieces during renovations. They noticed odd inconsistencies. The signature didn't match others from the artist. The frame was older than it should have been. Then came a deeper dig into shipping records, old donation letters, provenance documents, and that's where things got strange. The donor's family had ties to Europe, specifically to a region hit hard during World War II. Art was stolen, displaced, destroyed. And this portrait, it matched a missing painting listed in a private Italian archive from 70 years ago. What followed was months of research. Phone calls in broken Italian, late-night emails, old experts pulled out of retirement. Every new clue brought more questions, but also more clarity. Eventually they confirmed it. The painting was stolen, not from a gallery, from a family, a home. It hung over a piano in a modest villa before it vanished in the chaos of war. And here's where the coincidence turns into something else. The museum had no legal obligation to return it. They could have cited acquisition protocols, good faith possession, statutes of limitation, but instead the board voted unanimously, send it back. Not because they had to, because it was right. The moment of return wasn't grand. No press, no cameras. Just the descendant of the original owner, now a retired schoolteacher, standing quietly before a painting they'd only seen in black and white photographs, touching its frame like it might disappear again. Psychologically, this taps into something powerful, the human need for restoration, not just justice in a legal sense, but the emotional logic of setting things right. It's the same instinct that drives us to apologize when we didn't have to, or to keep a promise long after it's convenient. When people feel heard, when history is acknowledged, even silently, it builds something trust can grow in, and coincidences like this one, they remind us that not everything is random. Sometimes threads reconnect decades later in ways no one could have planned. A misfiled artwork, a curious employee, a story patiently waiting to be told. Because not all returns are about objects. Some are about memory, about dignity, about saying, we see you, and we didn't forget. And maybe that's the most mind-bending coincidence of all, that what's lost can still find its way home. Some stories make you pause, not because they're dramatic or tragic, but because they feel impossibly precise. Like reality itself got too clever for coincidence. There's one that still stirs a strange disbelief. Two strangers, both named Jim. One adopted, grew up never knowing his birth family, but years later he finds out he has a twin, also named Jim. Both had dogs named Toy. Both married women named Linda, then divorced, then remarried women named Betty, and both drove the same car, the same colour, the same model. These were not just shared tastes, they were mirrored lives. It sounds like a riddle written by the universe, but it's real. And it begs the question, what do we make of these moments that line up too perfectly? There's a psychological term called apophenia, the human tendency to find patterns in random data. It's how we see faces in clouds, or feel like someone calling right as we think of them is more than luck. Our brains are wired to seek meaning, especially in surprise alignments. Coincidences light up our pattern detectors, making the ordinary feel extraordinary. But there's also something more personal going on. In a world that often feels random and chaotic, coincidences give us a moment of pause, a flash of connection, a sense that something unseen might be stitching things together behind the scenes. Take phone numbers, for example. A man once called to book a hotel and gave his name. The receptionist paused, then asked if he was sure that was his number, because it was hers too. Same name, same number, different people, different cities. The odds are absurd, but still, it happened. And in that moment, they weren't just strangers. They were part of a story neither one of them could have written. Psychologically, that kind of story sticks because it violates our expectations just enough to seem meaningful. It doesn't feel like chaos. It feels like fate or design or some secret thread only we were meant to see. And that feeling matters. It reminds us that not everything has to be explainable to be valuable. That some of the most touching moments in life are the ones we can't file away logically. They live in the gap between probability and poetry. Coincidences, especially the eerie kind, often arrive like echoes, familiar, repeating, almost impossible. And while science may call them chance, our hearts treat them as clues. Tiny flashes of wonder that make the world feel more alive. Not every pattern has a reason, but every now and then, it's okay to believe that maybe, just maybe, something is winking at us through the randomness. Maybe that's what these echoes are, a quiet nudge to pay attention. Not just to numbers or names, but to the strange, beautiful ways life rhymes when we least expect it. Sometimes history feels like a giant game of connect the dots. Only the dots are spread across centuries and the lines that link them. They're anything but straight. Take this. On the day Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, June 28, 1914, his chauffeur made a wrong turn. That single detour rerouted world history. The car stalled in front of a cafe where one of the would-be assassins, Gavrilo Princip, happened to be standing, sandwich in hand. One unexpected turn, and the First World War was set in motion. A missed road, a lunch break, and the weight of millions of lives. Or consider this eerie overlap. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, two founding fathers, political rivals turned pen pals, died on the same day. But not just any day. It was July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after they signed the Declaration of Independence. A coincidence that feels less like chance and more like history holding its breath for a curtain call. There's something about these synchronicities that makes us pause. They defy neat explanations. They make us wonder about patterns we can't see, links we don't expect, and whether chaos has more choreography than we thought. Psychologically, we're wired to seek connections. It's part of how we make sense of randomness. The brain, craving meaning, draws lines between distant events, sometimes where none exist. But sometimes the links are real. Sometimes the randomness looks just a little too deliberate, like the case of Violet Jessop. She survived the sinking of the Titanic, then its sister ship, the Britannic. And before that, she worked aboard the Olympic, which also collided at sea. 3 sister ships, 3 disasters, 1 woman unharmed each time. Statistically improbable, emotionally uncanny. Even the arts aren't exempt. A century before the Titanic disaster, a novel was written about a massive ship called the Titan. Same size, same fate. Struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. Fiction eerily mirrored by future fact. Was it just imagination, or some strange echo of what was to come? These stories don't just amaze, they reveal something deeper. They show how moments, separated by decades or oceans, can still speak to one another. They remind us that history isn't just a sequence, it's a web, and every so often threads tug at each other in ways that make our skin prickle. There's comfort in that, strangely, in thinking we're part of something bigger, more intricate than we know, that even when things seem random or senseless, there might be hidden harmonies playing beneath the noise. It doesn't mean everything happens for a reason, but maybe some things rhyme more often than we expect. And in those moments when timelines converge, when fiction becomes fact, when 2 lives end on the same symbolic date, we feel it. That hush, that sense that history is not just what happened, but what connects. A man walks into a hotel and signs the guest book. When the clerk sees his name, her face changes, not with fear or suspicion, but with recognition. That name already exists in their system. Same first name, same last name, same spelling. But they've never met before. They're not relatives. They just share a name. And now the same destination. It sounds like the start of a novel, but this kind of coincidence is more common than we expect, and much harder to explain away when it comes with timing, proximity, or a sense of eerie overlap. There's something about seeing your own name show up in the world on someone else. It jolts you. Maybe it's the illusion that our name makes us singular. Maybe it's the way it carries our history, our sense of self. And then someone else walks in carrying that same label, just living a different story. It's strange and strangely grounding. Psychologically, this taps into a concept called identity disturbance, where the mind is momentarily jarred when we encounter a mirror that wasn't supposed to exist. A name twin isn't just familiar. It's unsettling because it forces a split. It invites the question, what if you weren't the only version of you? One famous case, 2 men named Jim, born in the same state, adopted by different families, both named Jim by their adoptive parents. Both grew up with dogs named Toy, married women named Linda, divorced, then remarried women named Betty. They both had sons named James Allen, smoked the same brand, drove the same car. They even vacationed at the same beach. None of this was orchestrated. They met for the first time at age 39. Some call it chance. Others lean towards something more poetic, like fate, synchronicity, or an invisible thread. But psychology often points to a simpler truth. Our brains are pattern finders. They notice alignments and seek meaning, even when randomness is at play. That doesn't mean the connections aren't real, just that their origins may not be as mystical as they feel. Still, when it happens to you, when a stranger shares not just your name but your rhythm, it's hard not to feel something stir, something that suggests we're part of a larger script, a wider web. And for a moment, the ordinary becomes cinematic. These echoes can show up in small ways too. An author discovers another writer publishing under her exact name. A passenger finds out the person sitting next to them on a flight shares not just their name, but their birthday. Sometimes it's a fluke. Other times, it sparks connection, curiosity, even friendship. What makes these moments powerful isn't just the coincidence, it's the emotional spark that follows. The brief destabilization of identity, the opening for reflection. It reminds us how thin the veil is between our stories and others, how close we are to versions of ourselves we've never met. So next time you hear your name called and someone else answers, pause. In that overlap lies something quietly profound. A reminder that in a world of billions, some threads cross more tightly than we can explain. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part that matters most. Two people born on the same day. Not just the same date, but the same year, same hospital, even the same wing, and they grow up worlds apart, only to cross paths decades later. Not as strangers, but as soulmates. That sounds like fiction. But these strange birth date overlaps happen more often than you might think. And when they do, they leave people feeling like the universe is playing with loaded dice. Because birthdays carry a certain weight. They're one of the first things we learn about someone, the kind of fact that's easy to overlook but hard to forget. So when a birthday overlaps in an uncanny way, it doesn't just register as trivia. It feels like a sign. There's the story of two best friends who discovered they were born on the exact same day at the same hospital, and their mothers had shared a hospital room. Or the tale of a teacher and student who found out in the middle of a classroom icebreaker that they not only shared a birth date, but were born just minutes apart in the same town. Suddenly the relationship took on this strange echo, like a mirror stretched through time. Psychologically, this taps into something called the frequency illusion. Once you notice something, you start seeing it everywhere. But the reverse can also be true. A single coincidence feels massive, even if statistically it's not so rare. It's not the probability that captures us. It's the poetry. And there's more going on here than numbers. Birthdate crossovers stir something deep in us because they make time feel less linear and more like a spiral. As if people's paths aren't just moving forward, but circling, sinking, occasionally aligning in ways that feel too perfect to be random. Let's take a moment to imagine what it feels like. You're chatting with someone new? Maybe it's casual, waiting in line, grabbing coffee, passing time, then birthdays come up. You say yours, they pause. Wait, me too. You both laugh. Then they add the year. You blink. It's the same. And when you mention where you were born, they finish your sentence. It's not just a coincidence anymore. It's a moment of alignment, and suddenly you're both standing in a small pocket of the world that belongs only to you two, a slice of time no one else quite fits into. In relationships, this kind of moment can be the seed of something deeper. Friends bond over shared stories, but something about a shared origin, literally beginning life on the same day, adds a layer of meaning that logic doesn't quite explain. It's not fate necessarily, but it feels like the universe winked. And maybe that's the real reason these moments feel so powerful. They're gentle interruptions to the regular rhythm of life. Little nudges that say, pay attention, there's something here. Because even if it's just a trick of statistics, We don't experience life as numbers. We live through feelings, through meanings we make up along the way. And coincidences, especially ones tied to when we began, offer us a story, a point of connection, a reminder that once in a while the threads do line up. You can call it chance. You can call it math. But when your birthday overlaps in just the right way, it feels like more than coincidence. It feels like a cosmic handshake. And that's a story we never forget. Some people call it chance. Others say it's destiny. But every now and then, something happens that makes you pause, makes you wonder if life has more design than we give it credit for. You bump into a stranger in a city you don't live in, and somehow they know your cousin. You open a book at random, and the quote on the page feels like it was written just for you. These aren't just cute stories for dinner parties. Psychologically, these moments stick with us because they break our sense of randomness. They suggest that maybe, just maybe, something larger is at play. In behavioral science, this is tied to something called pattern recognition bias. Our brains are built to find meaning, to link one thing to another. Most of the time, that helps us navigate the world. But once in a while, it creates these moments that feel bigger than logic, when unrelated threads of life suddenly knot together in perfect synchrony. Let's take a simple example. A woman loses her wallet on the subway. It's gone. Days later, someone mails it back, not just returned, but wrapped in a note that says, "You remind me of my sister." They'd never met, but the person who found it felt a connection, some invisible pull to do something kind. Not because they had to, because something felt aligned. Coincidences like this don't just surprise us. They open us. They make us pause long enough to see others as more than background characters. And they offer a weird kind of hope. That in a chaotic world, some things still click into place. In psychology, the feeling these coincidences create is called awe. It's that spine-tingling mix of smallness and wonder. And awe isn't just poetic, it's useful. Research shows it increases generosity, humility, even our sense of time. When people feel awe, they slow down, they listen more, they become more willing to help. So when your childhood friend calls you the same moment you were thinking of them, or you switch careers and find out your new boss once met your grandfather, pay attention. Maybe it's just luck, but maybe it's a crack in the pattern where something deeper shines through. The truth is, not every meeting is random. Not every moment is noise. Sometimes life aligns in ways we can't explain, and maybe don't need to, because whether it's fate, coincidence, or just beautifully timed chaos, those moments remind us we're all more connected than we think. And if paths are meant to cross, maybe all we have to do is notice when they do. Sometimes the end begins quietly. One man running late, one car door not closed properly, one decision to take the freeway instead of the back roads. In isolation, none of it seems extraordinary, but sometimes ordinary moments line up like dominoes, and when one tips, the rest fall with it. Chain reactions like these aren't just the stuff of elaborate physics, demos, or action films. They happen in real life, unexpected, unpredictable, and often tragically final. Psychologists call this a cascade effect. It's when one seemingly small event triggers a series of larger ones, each gaining momentum and consequence, often faster than anyone can react. There was once a case where a man slipped on a subway platform. A stranger reached out to help. In doing so, she blocked another commuter's path, who then missed their train. That delay meant they crossed the street 3 minutes later than planned, and right into the path of a driver who had just received devastating news and ran a red light. 3 minutes, one life lost. Dozens changed. None of them ever met. It's tempting to look at this and say it's just bad luck, and to a degree it is. But more deeply, these stories reveal something about how interwoven we all are. How cause and effect stretch further than we think. When we pull one thread, the whole web shifts, even if we don't feel the tremor right away. And that idea is both haunting and strangely grounding, because it means that even tiny choices have weight. Holding a door, losing your temper, choosing to speak or to stay silent. In systems thinking, this is known as emergent behavior, complex outcomes that arise not from one big move, but from many small ones combining over time. In human terms, it means lives don't unravel or transform all at once. They do so gradually through patterns and pivots we often don't see until we look back. There's a concept in aviation called the Swiss cheese model of accidents. Each slice of cheese represents a layer of safety or prevention. But each slice also has holes, flaws, oversights, or weaknesses. An accident only happens when the holes in every layer line up perfectly, allowing disaster to pass through. It's a chilling metaphor, but it helps us understand that tragedy often isn't about one bad choice. It's about many moments failing together, and yet that same model has a hopeful side. Because every layer that doesn't fail, every pause, every check-in, every bit of kindness or caution can stop the chain. Can be the moment the domino doesn't fall. We often think of coincidence as random or meaningless. But when patterns form from those coincidences, when one person's small action alters another's trajectory completely, we're reminded randomness doesn't mean powerlessness. In a world full of invisible threads, we're not just passengers on the ride, we're part of the mechanism, which means that just as one delay can end in heartbreak, one act of attention can reroute it entirely. The chain reaction doesn't just lead to death, it can lead to life too. A stranger stepping in. A plan changed last minute. A decision that doesn't seem important until it saves someone's everything. And maybe that's the quiet miracle buried in the chaos. That even in the most mind-bending coincidences, there's room for intention. There's space for us to interrupt the pattern. And become ourselves the reason the story turns out differently. You're reading a comic book, page after page of colourful panels, speech bubbles, action lines. Then something strange happens. The plot twist mirrors something in your life, so precisely it's eerie. A name, a phrase, a symbol. It's like the story already knew you, like it was waiting for you to find it. That's the thing about coincidences. When they get too close, they stop feeling random. They start feeling like a message. There's a story about a comic book published in the late 1990s. It was a niche title, a dark sci-fi tale. One of the characters, a man named Osama bin Laden, orchestrating an attack on New York, a full 3 years before September 11th. The resemblance wasn't vague, it was detailed, specific, and no one paid attention until after. Then people looked back and said, how could they have known? But they didn't. That's the unsettling part. They couldn't have. The creators were just inventing a villain, drawing from headlines of the time, weaving fiction from fragments of real life. It just happened to echo reality in a way no one could explain. Psychologically, this taps into something called apophenia, the brain's tendency to find patterns even where none exist. It's the same mechanism that lets us see faces in clouds or hear meaning in static. But sometimes those patterns aren't entirely imagined. Sometimes the lines really do connect. Another example, Superman. In 1938, 2 young Jewish teenagers created a character to represent strength, hope, and justice. They gave him a secret identity, a planet in ruins, a mission to protect the innocent. Years later, people noticed that Superman's origin mirrored the stories of refugees fleeing Europe during World War II. But the war hadn't started yet. The full horror wasn't known, and yet somehow their story saw it coming. It's not that comics are prophetic, it's that they distill something deeper. They capture the mood, the tension, the collective undercurrent that people can feel, even if they can't name it yet. Artists pick up on signals others miss. writers give form to invisible fears. This is why so many so-called coincidences feel personal. They catch something just under the surface, something we were already half aware of. A comic might introduce a character who reminds you of someone you lost. Or describe a moment you've lived word for word. Not because it was written for you, but because certain experiences are more universal than we realize. And when those rare, uncanny overlaps happen, between fiction and reality, between imagination and truth, it gives us pause. It makes us wonder if the universe is nudging us, if something is watching, if the stories know more than we think. But maybe it's not about knowing the future. Maybe it's about understanding the present so clearly that the future can't help but echo it. Art reflects the world. Sometimes it reflects what the world hasn't caught up to yet. So, when you stumble on a comic that feels like prophecy, don't rush to explain it away. Sit with it. Let it remind you that reality is often stranger than fiction, that our minds are wired for meaning, and that every story, even the wildest ones, might be holding up a mirror to something real, something true, waiting to be seen. A man survives 2 different shipwrecks on the exact same day, years apart. A woman finds her long-lost sister after unknowingly living next door to her for years. A set of twins, separated at birth, grows up to marry women with the same name, drive the same car, and name their dogs the same thing, without ever knowing the other existed. These stories sound like scripts from a surreal movie, but they're all real. And what makes them hit so hard isn't just the odds. They make us feel like maybe the universe is more connected than it seems. We're wired to notice patterns. Psychologically, our brains are meaning-making machines. They sift through chaos looking for signs, for echoes, for anything that makes things feel less random. So, when a coincidence strikes, especially one that feels poetic, it lands with extra weight. It's not just chance. It feels like fate, or at least a nudge from something bigger. Think about those moments in your own life. The friend you bumped into halfway across the world. The book you found right when you needed it most. The line from a stranger that somehow answered a question you hadn't said out loud. They don't always make logical sense, but emotionally they ring true. That's the power of poetic parallels. They don't explain. They resonate. One story often shared in psychology circles is the case of 2 strangers whose lives followed uncannily similar paths. Same birthday, same childhood hobby, both adopted and both unknowingly living just towns apart. When they finally met, it wasn't just their similarities that shocked people. It was the feeling that their lives had been moving in orbit around each other, waiting to collide. These moments invite wonder, and wonder changes how we see things. When life feels dry or predictable, a single odd alignment can remind us that not everything is planned, but not everything is random either, and that's a comforting kind of mystery. From a psychological standpoint, these moments may be about salience, the brain's tendency to highlight what stands out, but emotionally they do something else. They connect. They remind us that even in a world of billions, stories can mirror each other, paths can cross in ways we'd never expect, and timelines can echo like a chorus. It's easy to dismiss them as accidents, but sometimes they come right when you need perspective. A reminder that your story is still unfolding, that the script isn't finished, and that somewhere in the chaos there might be meaning waiting to be noticed. We don't need every detail to make sense for it to feel significant. Some of the most powerful realizations in life come from the strange and the small. A missed train that leads to meeting someone new. A dream that feels like déjà vu. A letter that arrives years late but right on time. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's just the math of a big, interconnected world. But maybe it's something else. A hidden rhythm we don't always hear but sometimes feel. And when those rare poetic parallels show up, they do something the rational mind can't. They make the heart pause. They make you look again. And for a moment, everything feels like part of a bigger pattern. Not everything has to mean something. But when something strange makes you wonder if it does, sometimes that wonder is enough. A crossword puzzle clue once led to a million-dollar moment. Back in 2012, a woman in the UK was working on her daily puzzle when one clue caught her attention. The answer? A rare word that just happened to be the final tiebreaker question on a televised quiz show, one she had recorded. Curious, she watched it, shouted the answer instinctively, and realized she had nailed a question that stumped the finalists. Coincidence? Sure. But it's also a reminder of how strange and intimate the mind can be. Sometimes it knows things before we realize it. Coincidences like this aren't as random as they seem. Psychologically, our brains are wired to seek patterns. They scan for meaning in chaos. That's how we survive. That's also why coincidences feel eerie. They aren't just events. They're experiences of alignment between what's happening out there and what's been quietly forming inside us. Imagine dreaming of a friend you haven't seen in years and then getting a message from them the next morning. Or walking into a bookstore, pulling a book off the shelf at random and finding the exact quote you needed to hear. These moments stick with us, not because they're logically explainable, but because they feel personal. They feel timed. But here's the twist. The most powerful coincidences don't just surprise us, they shift us. They interrupt routines. They create pause. And in that pause, something opens. A question, a choice, a possibility. Take the story of a man who missed his usual train one morning by mere seconds. Frustrated, he took a different route to work. That change. It led him past a building he'd never noticed, with a job posting in the window. He applied, got it. And it changed the course of his career. All because of a moment that, at the time, felt like an inconvenience. Or the woman who found a lost earring while hiking, one that matched a pair her grandmother gave her years ago. Not the same one, a different pair, same make, same style, same era, left her with chills, left her wondering, what are the chances? Statistically, coincidences are bound to happen in a world with billions of people, millions of routines, infinite variables. But psychologically, they still matter. They're anchors of attention. They catch us when we're drifting. They remind us that even the ordinary can become extraordinary if you're paying attention. And maybe that's the real message hidden in a crossword clue, or a missed train, or a found earring. Not just that something weird happened, but that we noticed, that we were awake enough to feel its weight. Because when something unlikely breaks through the noise, it forces us to look up, look around, and wonder. And that wonder, that's where the magic is. Coincidences might not always make sense, but they don't have to. Sometimes their only job is to make us pause. And in a world that rarely slows down, that pause can be everything. They printed it the day before it happened. That's what makes it so eerie. A newspaper dated September 10th, 2001, showing a skyline with two planes in ominous formation. Or an old article from the early 20th century predicting wireless handheld devices that could connect people across oceans. Sometimes it feels like the past whispered to the future and no one noticed until the echo came true. Newspaper predictions sit in this strange space between coincidence and prophecy. And when we stumble across one that feels too accurate, it rattles something deep in us, like the timeline isn't as linear as we thought. Take a small-town paper from the 60s that casually imagined humans living on the moon by the end of the century. At the time, it sounded like science fiction. But now, we're talking about lunar bases and Mars missions like they're just another engineering challenge. Or the 1993 cartoon strip that drew a boxy device eerily similar to today's smartphones, complete with video calling and news alerts. These weren't just good guesses, they were almost too good. Psychologically, there's a reason these coincidences grab us. The brain is wired to seek patterns, especially ones that hint at meaning. When something in the past lines up perfectly with the future, it's not just interesting, it feels significant. It triggers a mix of awe and confusion, the kind that makes you pause mid-scroll and say, "Wait, what?" Part of it is cognitive bias. We notice and remember the hits, but forget the thousands of misses. Most predictions printed in newspapers never came close to reality. Jetpacks by 1980, underwater cities, robot butlers in every home. But the ones that land, the ones that feel like they broke the laws of time, those get passed around, clipped, shared and retold for decades, because they make the world feel less random. Like someone saw through the fog. And sometimes those predictions weren't guesses at all, they were reflections of vision. Writers, artists and journalists with imagination sharp enough to forecast not just what might be possible, but what might be probable. They looked at the pace of technology, the ripple of culture, the trend of human desire, and followed it forward. It wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition stretched to its limits. Still, there are outliers, moments that defy logic. A crossword puzzle that accidentally included code names from a classified operation. A short story that eerily mirrored a real-life assassination, down to the details. Cases like these feel less like predictions and more like glitches, like the script got leaked before the play. And while some might chalk it up to conspiracy or call it fate or coincidence, there's another possibility. That maybe time loops back on itself in small, strange ways. That maybe ideas float around, landing wherever there's a mind open enough to catch them. That creativity, in its purest form, sometimes taps into something just ahead of its time. Whether it's coincidence or subconscious genius, one thing's clear. These newspaper predictions do more than amuse. They remind us that even the wildest ideas can turn real. That today's fiction can become tomorrow's fact. And that sometimes the future leaves clues in yesterday's headlines. Not every headline ages well. But once in a while, one echoes forward and lands with a chill. Some graves are hidden on purpose. Not by enemies or accidents, but by families. People who buried their loved ones in silence, in places without markers, dates or names. These are shadow burial sites. They don't show up on maps. But they tell stories that are too loud to say out loud. Sometimes it was fear. A loved one died by suicide or from a stigmatized illness. In older times, that meant shame. Entire families could be judged by a single death. So instead of a ceremony, there was a quiet burial at the edge of a field or just beyond the churchyard wall. Not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much about what the world might say. Other times, it was resistance. In places where culture or identity was under threat, people buried their dead in hidden places as an act of quiet defiance. Under colonial regimes, in wartime or under occupation, official cemeteries weren't always safe. So people made new ones, out of sight but not out of love. And then there's the most heartbreaking reason: invisibility. Whole communities, enslaved people, indigenous families, refugees, denied land, denied names, denied even the right to grieve in public. Their burial grounds were often unmarked not by choice, but by force. Today, many of these sites lie beneath highways, parking lots, or developments. We walk over them without even knowing. Psychologically, this reveals something deeply human. We want to honour those we've lost. But when grief is politicised or shamed or stripped of space, it doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, literally and emotionally. Shadow burials are what happen when mourning has to adapt, when it has to hide in order to survive. But these places still speak. A forgotten gravestone in the woods, a cluster of stones near a stream, soil that refuses to be ploughed. The earth remembers, even when people try to forget. In recent years, archaeologists and historians have begun working with descendants to locate and protect these sites. Ground-penetrating radar, oral histories, drone mapping. These aren't just tools, they're ways of returning dignity to the dead and truth to the living. Because recovering these stories isn't just about the past, it's about restoring what was lost, identity, belonging, a place in the human story. It's about seeing who was erased and why. And maybe, on a deeper level, it's about facing our discomfort with hidden grief. With the parts of history we'd rather not disturb. But grief doesn't vanish when ignored. It just waits, quietly, patiently, for someone to say, "I see you now." Not all graves have stones, but every life leaves a trace. And when we find it, we're not just uncovering a burial site, we're recovering a voice. Some places are marked by what happens there, others by what doesn't. There's a city on every continent with a street no one walks down after dark. A corner store no one remembers opening. A train line that always seems to arrive 1 minute too early, or 1 minute too late. Sometimes a city has a shadow, something just out of sight, but deeply felt. This isn't about superstition or stories from a campfire. It's about coincidence. Patterns too strange to explain, repeating across cities, across time. Take, for instance, the case of the identical strangers in New York and London. Two men who looked alike, dressed alike, and worked in the same field, who met by accident at an airport, only to discover their mothers had the same name and birth date. Coincidence? Statistically, maybe. But emotionally, it leaves a trace, a kind of glitch in the narrative. Because when something that shouldn't happen does, it forces the mind to pause, to look closer. Psychologists sometimes call this apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections in unrelated things. But there's also the opposite, meaningful coincidences that hint at unseen order. Carl Jung called these synchronicities, events that feel orchestrated, not random, like a city whispering your name right before you arrive, or running into someone you were just thinking about, halfway across the world. And cities dense with lives and movement are breeding grounds for these anomalies. A woman in São Paulo gets on the same bus every day for years, until one morning a missed alarm causes her to leave late. And that day, she meets someone who changes her entire life. Not because it was meant to happen, but because it did. When patterns like that repeat, across cities, across cultures, it becomes harder to dismiss. A child in Tokyo draws a picture of a place they've never been, a temple in Istanbul. A man in Cape Town has a dream about a flood, and the next morning the main pipe bursts on his street. These aren't prophecies, they're overlaps between thought and reality, between randomness and reason. What makes it stranger is that we tend to remember coincidences more vividly. They stick like a smudge on the window of logic. They don't fit our usual way of making sense of the world, so they get bookmarked in the brain, replayed, reinterpreted, which only makes them feel more real. But here's where it gets interesting. Whether these moments are orchestrated by fate or just flickers of chance, they shape how we move through our environment. They affect what we notice, what we follow, what we avoid. They become part of a city's psychology, not in the official maps or brochures, but in the shared stories. The places we just feel are different. And that feeling? That's what we mean by a city's shadow. It's the uncanny tug of memory in a place you've never been, the echo of something familiar in a stranger's face, the instinct to turn left instead of right, and realizing later that it mattered. Every city has its own, not marked in red, not circled on any guide, but there, waiting, just beneath the surface. So next time something odd happens, something too perfect, too strange, or too soon, don't just brush it off. You might have stepped into the shadow. It starts with a melody, nothing complicated, just a few notes strung together in a way that feels familiar. Then it happens. That strange tingle in your chest, like you've heard this before, like you already know where it's going, except you've never heard it in your life. Some people call it déjà vu. Others brush it off as coincidence. But music has this uncanny ability to predict your emotions before you even feel them, to soundtrack your thoughts before they've fully formed. That's the strange beauty behind what some call a musical premonition. It's not magic, it's memory. Or at least how the brain plays with it. Psychologists believe our brains are constantly scanning for patterns, anticipating what might come next, based on what we've heard before. And music, with its rhythm and repetition, feeds that system. It builds expectations, then surprises us just enough to keep us hooked. But every now and then, a song doesn't just surprise you. It feels like it knows you, like it was written with your exact life in mind. And that's where it gets weird. There's the story of a man who composed a song he believed came to him in a dream, only to find out later, after years, it matched almost note for note a track released on an obscure record in the 60s, one he'd never heard and had no way of accessing. Or the teenager who wrote lyrics in her notebook as a joke, only to stumble across a chart-topping single a year later that echoed her words, line for line. Coincidences? Maybe. But they left people wondering. Because moments like these challenge the boundaries between inspiration and memory, between random chance and something more connected. They hint at a web we can't fully see, where melodies travel in ways we can't trace, where emotions move faster than thought, and where the past sometimes shows up before we've even lived it. Psychologically, this taps into what's called cryptomnesia, a phenomenon where we remember something without realizing we're remembering it. A song on in the background, while you were half asleep. A tune hummed by a stranger in passing. The mind can tuck these things away, only to bring them back later disguised as brand new inspiration. But not every case can be explained so neatly. Sometimes the connection runs deeper. There are people who have written songs only to discover they eerily reflected a future event, a loss that hadn't happened yet, a love they hadn't met. It's easy to dismiss this as coincidence. But easy doesn't always mean accurate, because even if we set aside the metaphysical, music itself is a language of emotion. It captures what we feel before we can say it. It processes what's buried deep and lets it rise to the surface. So maybe it's not about predicting the future. Maybe it's about revealing what we already know, what we're too busy or too guarded to notice. Music doesn't just echo back our thoughts. Sometimes it leads them. And when it does, it can feel like the universe is winking at you, like time has folded just enough to let something through. Not a warning, not a sign, just a sound that knew you before you knew yourself. It looks like a strange mistake, maybe even a glitch in time. A photo taken in the exact same spot, same expressions, same background, same people. Except it wasn't staged, it wasn't planned, and it happened decades apart. One man stumbles across a childhood photo at his partner's house. Except he's in it too, standing in the background as a stranger. A family picture from a summer vacation, taken years before they'd ever met. Years before they'd ever know they'd fall in love. Their lives already overlapping quietly, long before they had any idea. It feels like fiction. But this kind of coincidence, where two timelines fold into each other without warning, is real. And it happens more often than you'd expect. Psychologists call this serendipity bias. The brain finds comfort in patterns and meaning. So when an event lines up so perfectly it seems impossible, we hold on to it, we replay it. It's not just surprise, it's a sense that something bigger might be at play. A hidden thread weaving through our lives, occasionally catching the light. There's a photo of a young girl at Disney World. In the background, another family smiles for their own camera. Nearly 2 decades later, the two girls meet again as college roommates. It's only when one of them pulls out the old photo that they realize they were once captured in the same frame. Two kids, two families, a shared second frozen in time before memory had even kicked in. And what's wild is this. These aren't just charming stories. They hint at how connected our lives really are, not in a mystical way, but in a deeply human one. Think about how many people pass through the edges of your life every day. People you brush past at a bus stop, stand behind in a grocery store, or sit next to in a classroom. Most you'll never see again, but some, just a few, might loop back later, unexpectedly, like a delayed echo. These coincidences often feel orchestrated, but often they're a reminder of how many invisible intersections are always happening. Paths that don't mean much in the moment, but take on new weight in hindsight, like a future memory waiting to be discovered. What makes the photo loop so powerful is that it doesn't just show where we were, it shows where we were going, before we even knew it. It reveals that sometimes our most significant connections start long before we're ready for them. So if you ever come across a snapshot that makes your stomach flip, pause, not because it's magic, but because your life, like everyone else's, is full of quiet alignments, and sometimes the camera just happens to catch one. Moments like these don't break the rules of reality, they reveal it, how time, coincidence, and connection dance together when we're not looking. Some patterns are obvious. A birthday printed on a receipt, a timestamp in the corner of a photo, but others hide in plain sight. You've probably held something with a date on it and never even realized it was there, not on the surface, but built in. Hidden date codes, quiet little signatures, exist in everything from snack bags to sneakers, each one whispering a timestamp to those who know how to read it. Take a look at a soda can. Somewhere on the bottom, you'll see a string of letters and numbers. To most people, it's just gibberish, but within that jumble is a production date. Same thing on your toothpaste, your vitamins, even your car's windshield. A tiny code stamped at the factory, revealing the moment it was born. And sometimes those codes end up doing something strange. They create coincidences that feel almost too perfect. Like a couple who bought a used couch and found a lost wedding ring inside, engraved with the same date as their anniversary. Or someone opening a book at a thrift store and finding a name and date written inside, matching their birthday to the year. A long-forgotten gift, looping back through time, waiting to be found again. Psychologically, we're wired to notice these moments. It's called apophenia, the tendency to see patterns or connections in unrelated things. But sometimes the connection doesn't just feel real, it is real. These hidden codes, stamped by design or by chance, bridge moments across decades. They act like time machines in disguise. There's a story of a man who restored a vintage motorcycle only to discover the serial number traced back to a model released the exact day he was born. He'd had no idea when he bought it. He just liked the shape, the sound, the feel. But that quiet number under the seat, it had been waiting for him. These patterns don't control anything. They don't predict your fate or shape your future. But they do something subtler. They remind you that time doesn't always flow in straight lines, that some things circle back, appear when you're ready, or resurface when they're needed most. In behavioral science, there's something known as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. Once you notice something for the first time, like a rare word or a specific number, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere. Not because it's suddenly more common, but because your brain is now primed to find it. Hidden codes work the same way. Once you know they're there, you can't unsee them. On the back of a receipt, etched into glass, tucked inside packaging, little footprints of time trailing behind, and whether they mean something profound or just curious, they serve a purpose. They make us pause, look closer, wonder. Was it always there? Was it waiting? Some people treat these discoveries like puzzles to solve. Others treat them like signs. Either way, they add a layer to the ordinary. A simple object becomes a story. A moment becomes a message. A coincidence becomes a connection. So the next time you unwrap a candy bar, glance at the numbers near the seal. The next time you thrift something second-hand, check for handwriting, initials, or etched marks. You might not find anything, but then again, you might. Because not every message is sent. Some are stamped, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to notice. It's strange how certain patterns follow us. You move cities, change jobs, start fresh. But somehow, the same kinds of people show up. The same types of situations unfold. The same challenges reappear, dressed in slightly different clothes. At first, it feels like coincidence, then maybe bad luck. But what if it's something else? Psychologists have long studied a phenomenon called repetition compulsion. It's the unconscious drive to recreate familiar emotional experiences, even the difficult ones, not because we want to suffer, but because part of us is trying to resolve something, trying to get it right this time. That's why someone who grew up walking on eggshells might find themselves in relationships where they're always trying to keep the peace. Or why a person who felt overlooked as a kid might chase validation through overwork. These aren't conscious choices. They're emotional reflexes. And over time, they shape what feels normal. Serial life patterns aren't just habits. They're echoes, emotional muscle memory. A loop the brain runs, not because it's helpful, but because it's familiar. But familiarity isn't the same as truth. And recognizing the pattern is the first sign you're ready to rewrite it. Here's a simple example. Imagine someone who always ends up being the caretaker in every friendship. The one who listens, supports, gives. They may not realize it, but part of them might believe that being needed is how you stay loved. That dynamic might have started early, maybe in a home where love came with conditions. The pattern repeats not because they want it to, but because it feels safe, predictable, and maybe deep down reparative. But when they finally notice it, pause and ask, why do I always end up here? That moment is powerful. It opens the door to choice, to asking for reciprocity, to letting someone else be the strong one for a change. Psychologically, this awareness shifts the cycle. It brings unconscious habits into conscious light. And once something is conscious, it becomes editable. Not instantly, not perfectly, but slowly, one decision at a time. It might mean setting a boundary you've never set, saying no without guilt, choosing the quieter path when your reflex is to fix, prove, or chase. It's not easy. These patterns often run deep. But every time you interrupt them, you build new emotional muscle. You start to define yourself not by the script you were handed, but by the story you want to live. And what's fascinating is that once you begin that shift, the world responds differently too. You start to attract people who meet you in the middle. You stop auditioning for love. You stop repeating what never worked and start creating something that does. Coincidences lose their magic when they turn into patterns, but patterns lose their power when they're named. So if you keep finding yourself in the same situation again and again, it's not weakness. It's an invitation to listen more closely, to understand what your life is trying to teach you, and to remember you're not doomed to repeat. You're designed to evolve. A coin toss seems like the simplest decision in the world. Heads or tails? Yes or no? One path or the other? But every so often, a coin toss doesn't just decide something small, it rewrites the course of a life. And what looks like pure chance ends up feeling like fate dressed in disguise. Imagine someone standing on a street corner, unsure whether to turn left or right, flipping a coin just to break the tie. Heads, so they go left. And 5 minutes later, they meet the person they end up marrying. The coin didn't know, it couldn't. But it pushed the first domino, and the rest of the story fell into place. Psychologists call this retrospective coherence. Our brain's habit of stitching together the randomness of life into a story that feels meaningful. We crave narrative. We want cause and effect, beginnings and endings, a reason for why things happen. So even when a moment is technically random, our minds can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't? And sometimes, coincidences are too eerie to ignore. Like two strangers seated next to each other on a flight, only to discover they were born in the same hospital, on the same day, delivered by the same doctor. Or someone buying a second-hand book and finding a love letter inside, written by their own grandparent decades earlier. These stories make us pause, not because they prove destiny, but because they shake our grip on logic just enough to let mystery in. From a psychological perspective, our brains are pattern detectors. We're built to notice links and recognize when something stands out. And when two unrelated things align just right, it triggers a sense of wonder. Some researchers call it the meaning response, an emotional reaction to something that feels too perfect to be random. It doesn't have to be supernatural to feel profound. It just has to feel like it matters. Here's the thing. Life is mostly ordinary, routines, errands, the expected. But when a coincidence drops into that rhythm, it jolts us awake. It says, look again, pay attention. The world might still have surprises for you. That feeling, that spark of connection or curiosity can stay with us long after the moment passes. And not all coin tosses are literal. Sometimes we make a choice that feels small. Take the early train instead of the later one. Text a friend on a whim. Apply to one more job after deciding you were done trying. These are moments that could easily pass unnoticed, but now and then they crack the timeline open. They lead to a conversation, an idea, a detour that shifts everything. What if that one flip wasn't random? What if you were always meant to meet them, land there, read that line? We'll never know for sure, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the power of a coincidence isn't in proving fate. Maybe it's in reminding us that even in a world that often feels predictable and mapped out, there are still pages unwritten. There are still moments that can astonish us, choices that matter more than we realize, and simple decisions like a coin toss that might just change everything. Not because they're magic, but because they crack us open to something bigger. A sense that somehow we're exactly where we need to be. It's rare, but it happens. A day where joy and grief share the same seat. Where a tuxedo is worn not for celebration, but to mourn. Where someone says, I do, while someone else says goodbye. The overlap of a wedding and a funeral is a kind of emotional whiplash that life occasionally delivers with surreal precision. One family welcomes a new chapter, another closes one. And sometimes, incredibly, both events happen within the same few hours to the same people. Imagine walking out of a church, still holding on to the last notes of a wedding vow, and walking back in moments later for a eulogy. Same aisle, same flowers, same people, trying to recalibrate their hearts in real time. Psychologically, this collision of emotion is almost too much for the brain to process cleanly. Humans tend to compartmentalize, joy in one box, grief in another. But when life ignores the labels, it can leave people stunned, disoriented. The mind reaches for order, but the heart has no script for this. And yet, in those moments, something remarkable often happens. People drop their usual filters, hugs last longer, words come out messier but more honest. There's less small talk, more presence. It's as if joy and sorrow together unlock something deeper than either could alone. There's a term in psychology, emotional granularity. It refers to our ability to feel and articulate complex emotions, not just good or bad, but the layered mix in between. A wedding-funeral overlap forces that granularity on us. You're not just happy or sad, you're awestruck, gutted, grateful, speechless. Sometimes a grandmother passes away the morning of her granddaughter's wedding. The family chooses to go ahead with the ceremony, not to minimize the loss, but to honor a wish. Grief walks beside them down the aisle, There's laughter at the reception, followed by tears during speeches. The cake is cut, and later, candles are lit. Every moment feels amplified, sacred, unforgettable. In those cases, people often say things like, "She would have wanted us to celebrate," or "He would have loved this music." And they mean it, because the truth is, death doesn't cancel love. If anything, it sharpens its edges, makes every word more precious, every smile more fragile and beautiful. We don't talk about this overlap enough, probably because it's hard to explain and harder to hold, but it reveals something essential about how humans navigate life. We are wired to carry contradiction, to break and celebrate in the same breath, to hold two truths at once. This hurts and this matters. Not everyone will experience this exact overlap, but we all at some point will be asked to hold joy and grief in the same hand. And how we do that, how we show up, speak gently, stay soft even when it's hard, that's what leaves a mark. Because in the end, the moments that break your brain are often the ones that also break you open. And sometimes, strangely, that's where the healing begins. A man walks into a bookstore, heads to the shelf, and grabs a novel, one he's never heard of by an author he's never read. On page 74, he pauses. A name, his name, then a birthday, his birthday. And finally, a story that mirrors his own so precisely. It feels less like fiction and more like surveillance. His hands shake. Coincidence? Maybe, but something in him won't call it that. We like to think our lives follow a thread. Straightforward, linear, within our control. But every now and then, something happens that throws that idea out the window. You meet a stranger who shares not only your hometown, but the exact same childhood address. You dream of someone you haven't seen in years, only to get a call from them the next morning. Or you pick up a book you've never read and find your life written into its pages. How? Psychologists call this apophenia, our tendency to seek patterns, even when none exist. But they also acknowledge something else. The human brain isn't just looking for patterns, it's looking for meaning. It's trying to make sense of randomness. And when that randomness hits too close to home, it doesn't feel random anymore. Let's take the book prediction story. One explanation is pure chance. With enough books and enough people, the probability of personal overlap isn't zero. But psychology also offers another idea: confirmation bias. When something aligns with our story, we hold onto it tightly. The details that match stand out. The ones that don't, they fade. And yet, even knowing this, the sensation sticks, because something deeper is happening. A coincidence, especially one that's personal, makes us pause. It interrupts the script of everyday life. Suddenly, the world doesn't feel mechanical or indifferent. It feels strangely like it's paying attention. That feeling, that maybe, just maybe, there's a hidden order behind the mess, is powerful. And whether or not it's real in the scientific sense, it's real in the emotional one. Because what these moments often do is force reflection. They make us reevaluate our choices, our paths, our connections. They ignite curiosity. Why this moment? Why this message? Why me? In some cases, people even treat them as signs, not in a mystical way necessarily, but as nudges, as permission to change direction, or to keep going. It's not always rational, but it doesn't have to be, because meaning is personal. It's not about proving that something was fate. It's about what that moment inspires you to do next. Think about your own story. The random book that changed everything. The quote that hit you at just the right time. The uncanny run-in that still makes you smile in disbelief. They don't have to make logical sense to matter. Their power is in the pause they create, the way they make you look twice, slow down, and wonder. And maybe that's the point. Not that the universe is secretly choreographing your life, but that you are, by noticing, by connecting, by caring. Coincidences feel magical because they ask us to pay attention, to feel more alive, to ask bigger questions. Sometimes the most unbelievable moments aren't trying to break your brain, they're just trying to open it. A quiet glance at a calendar can feel mundane. But imagine noticing that two strangers born decades apart share the exact same day for their final breath. That unsettling echo of dates isn't just a trick of coincidence. It's a reminder of how our brains crave meaning in patterns even when the universe seems indifferent. Deadly date. Echo reveals one of the most haunting forms of coincidence. The uncanny way dates can link lives and deaths across time and space. We tend to think of dates as fixed markers, a way to organize our days. Yet sometimes those markers line up to connect people in startling ways. Psychologically, this taps into our pattern-seeking drive. The brain is wired to spot connections. It helped our ancestors survive by linking footprints to predators. Today, that same urge can turn ordinary calendar entries into eerie reflections of fate. Consider two women who lived continents apart. One was born on August 10th, 1919, and died on September 2nd, 2019. The other arrived on that very same September 2nd, but 75 years later. Both were artists. Both left behind small keepsakes that were discovered on identical dates. No family ties, no shared hometown, only that relentless calendar echo linking their endings and beginnings. That kind of story grips us because it feels like more than mere accident. It feels like a whispered message from something greater. Psychologists call this apophenia, our tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in randomness. It's why we see faces in clouds or believe that a familiar song airing on the radio is a sign. When two deaths align on the same calendar date, our minds leap to stories of destiny or cosmic design. Yet, statistical research shows that with enough events in the world, some will line up in uncanny ways. Still, the emotional power persists because we're not just data points, we're meaning makers. In another case, a small village mourned two tragic accidents that occurred on May 15th, 3 years apart. The first was a landslide that claimed a father and daughter. The second, an electrical fire in the same valley, swept up a teacher and her nephew. Villagers whispered of a curse, but researchers explained that clusters of risk factors, weather patterns, aging infrastructure, made that date unusually dangerous. Even so, the coincidence of lives ending on the same calendar day bonded the community in grief and solidarity. Shared sorrow became a bridge across heartbreak. So why do these echoes feel so profound? Partly because they tap into our need for narrative. We're wired to create stories that link past, present, and future. Dates give us chapters. When two stories share a page, it feels like fate editing our lives. This narrative instinct can bring comfort or dread. For survivors, discovering a date echo can spark a sense of connection to someone who went before, a reminder that we're part of something larger than our own timeline. But there's another layer too. The emotional resonance of shared dates can catalyze compassion. When a community sees two tragedies share a calendar mark, empathy often grows stronger. People rally to support struggling families. Memorial services take on deeper meaning, and the very act of remembering becomes a collective ritual. In psychology, this reflects the power of shared symbols to build social bonds. A calendar date becomes more than a number. It becomes a beacon for communal care. Ultimately, Deadly Date Echo reminds us that coincidences aren't just curiosities. They're invitations to reflect on how we find significance in a vast, unpredictable world. Whether you chalk it up to chance or cosmic choreography, these matched dates touch something deep in our humanity. They remind us that life can be fragile, that stories intersect in surprising ways, and that meaning often emerges where we least expect it. Next time you glance at your calendar, take a moment to pause. Notice the ordinary pattern of days, weeks, and months, and imagine the countless lives woven into those numbers. In each date lies a hidden echo waiting to be discovered, a reminder that even in randomness we find the stories that bind us together. Coincidence may be random, but the connections it sparks are profoundly real. A glance across a crowded street can feel like looking into a mirror, only to realize the face staring back isn't yours. That moment of startling familiarity taps into something deep in our minds. We expect each person to be unique, but sometimes strangers resemble us so closely it feels like the universe hitting refresh on your own features. What's happening when the world presents us with these uncanny lookalikes? The idea of stranger resemblance goes beyond mere curiosity. It reframes how we see identity and connection. Psychologically, we're drawn to patterns and known shapes. Our brains constantly search for the familiar in a sea of faces. When we spot someone who could be our twin from another life, our neural networks light up in regions tied to face recognition and reward. That jolt of recognition, followed by disbelief, isn't just a quirky trick of mirrors. It reveals how our minds balance familiarity and novelty. Imagine you're walking down a busy avenue and catch sight of someone whose features, maybe the tilt of their jaw or the shape of their eyes, mirror your own. You pause because your brain flags that resemblance as significant. In one documented case, two strangers discovered they not only looked almost identical, but also shared birthdays years apart. Both found themselves flipping through social media in search of explanations, only to end up marveling at the odds. That shared birthday added another layer of improbability, making their resemblance feel like a cosmic wink. Psychologically, these moments connect to something called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, where once you notice a pattern, it seems to appear everywhere. After seeing your double, you'll suddenly spot similar features in passing faces, and each one feels like confirmation. But cognitive scientists remind us that true facial similarity among unrelated people is rare. We're wired to see patterns even when they're products of chance. In reality, hidden beneath the striking first impression are subtle differences our conscious mind glosses over until we scrutinize closely. Across cultures, stories of doppelgangers and unrelated twins spark both awe and unease. In folklore, encountering your double could portend great fortune or deep misfortune. Modern science offers a less dramatic, but no less fascinating perspective. Genetic variation creates a finite set of facial building blocks, so combinations occasionally align in surprising ways. When strangers resemble one another, it's a reminder that shared human traits are more common than we might feel when lost in our own uniqueness. Beyond astonishment, these chance encounters reveal something about connection. Recognizing a part of yourself in a stranger can stir empathy. It's easier to feel kinship when someone looks familiar, even if you'll never exchange names. A study on social perception found that people tend to attribute more trustworthiness and warmth to faces that resemble their own. In other words, a fleeting resemblance can dissolve the barrier between self and other, making a busy sidewalk feel a bit more intimate. Notice too how these coincidences invite reflection on identity. We carry our uniqueness like a private signature, but seeing it mirrored prompts us to ask, how distinctive am I really? And what threads tie me to the vast array of faces in the world? That question transforms a simple glance into a gentle meditation on humanity's shared blueprint. It reminds us that, despite our individual stories, we're all variations on an age-old pattern. So the next time someone's face halts you in your tracks, take a moment to appreciate that brush with the improbable. It's a glimpse into the brain's quest for familiarity, a spark of empathy from shared features, and a subtle nudge toward unity in diversity. In the grand tapestry of chance and genetics, stranger resemblance isn't just a quirky coincidence. It's a bridge between selves, a silent reminder that even perfect strangers can reflect who we are. It feels like opening an old book and finding your own handwriting on its pages. You're scrolling through social media when suddenly you see a stranger who shares not only your birthday, but your hometown and your favorite childhood game. Or maybe you're at a quiet coffee shop when someone's offhand comment about your favorite obscure band makes you turn and realize you're looking at someone whose life seems to mirror your own in impossibly specific ways. These moments don't just surprise us, they stop us in our tracks with a sense that the universe is winking at us, reminding us that we're somehow connected by invisible threads. This is the uncanny discovery match. The moment two lives align on improbable details, and suddenly coincidence feels like destiny. Most of us brush off small coincidences, bumping into an old friend at the grocery store or thinking of someone just before they call. But an uncanny discovery match goes further. It's the kind of serendipity that leaves you wondering if there's more structure to randomness than you ever suspected. Psychologically, this taps into something called pattern recognition. Our brains are wired to find meaning and to spot connections, even when the odds suggest chance is at play. When you experience one of these matches, you're not just noticing a quirk of probability, you're participating in a moment that feels custom-made for you. Imagine two women who grew up 2,000 miles apart, both raised by single parents in small towns. Neither knew the other existed. Yet when they meet decades later at a conference, they discover they've both lived in the same apartment building in Chicago, graduated from the same high school 2 years apart, and share the same middle name, an uncommon one passed down in both families for generations. It's more than coincidence. It's a mirror reflecting your own narrative back at you. In situations like this, people often describe a shiver of recognition, as if their story has been secretly woven into someone else's. What makes these matches so gripping is how they challenge our sense of control and randomness. On one hand, your mind whispers that it's just maths, millions of people, millions of birthdays, so statistically someone out there shares your details. On the other hand, your heart insists there's meaning hidden within that math. This tension between logic and wonder is what keeps you talking about it for days. You replay every twist and turn that led to that moment, savouring each detail like clues in a mystery. How you decided to attend that conference on a whim, or how you cracked a pun that someone else found hilarious. Psychologically, these experiences also deepen our sense of belonging. In a world that can feel vast and impersonal, finding someone whose life resonates so precisely with your own creates an instant bond. It's as if the coincidence validates your own story, whispering that you're not alone in the quirks and passions that make you, you. Studies on social connections show that sharing unexpected commonalities fosters trust and empathy more quickly than ordinary small talk. When you learn that someone else keeps the same old journal you once discarded, or that they've always collected the same odd trinkets, you're not just amused, you're drawn closer, sharing an unspoken "I see you" that builds a bridge between lives. Yet there's a flip side to this phenomenon. Sometimes the thrill of matching details can slip into a kind of confirmation bias, where you begin to seek out further connections and overlook differences. You might spend hours comparing playlists, searching for more overlaps, convinced that every shared song or memory holds deeper significance. While it's a joyous rabbit hole, it can also blur the line between genuine discovery and self-fulfilling curiosity. Recognizing that impulse can help you stay present in the moment, cherishing the surprise without turning it into a quest for proof of fate. In the end, the uncanny discovery match reminds us that life is full of hidden intersections, waiting for us to stumble upon them. It's not just a trick of chance, it's a tribute to our brain's love of pattern and our heart's longing for connection. Those moments of mirror-like coincidence spark wonder, reshape our understanding of randomness, and leave us richer in stories and relationships. Next time you find yourself face to face with your own reflection in a stranger's story, pause and revel in the mystery. After all, sometimes it takes a perfect match to remind us how remarkably intertwined our narratives truly are. Imagine standing in your kitchen, mind drifting to an old friend you haven't seen in years, just before the phone rings. That moment when your inner voice seems to send out a signal, and the universe answers back. It feels like you've peeked behind a curtain into another reality. You pause, stunned, as though two worlds have collided, yours and one that almost feels parallel. These uncanny moments are more than random quirks of fate. They're what we might call a glimpse of a parallel universe, where coincidences bridge the space between what we imagine and what really happens. It's not about secret dimensions folding into ours, but about the fascinating interplay of thought, perception, and chance. When these worlds overlap, we're left breathless, as if we've tapped into something both mysterious and familiar. Consider the first time you dream of a stranger's face, only to meet them the very next day in a crowded cafe. Or the afternoon you pick up a book at the library and flip to find your own name tucked inside the dedication. Perhaps it's that family heirloom you thought lost forever, reappearing in a dusty attic when you least expect it. Each encounter defies statistical odds and ignites a spark of wonder. It's not just coincidence, it's an astonishing reminder that reality is woven from endless threads of possibility. Psychologically, our minds are wired to find patterns. We look for meaning in chaos, stitching together fragments until they form a story that feels significant. That process is called apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections between unrelated things. At the same time, our brains filter out the mundane to amplify the extraordinary. We rarely recall the thousands of missed calls and random thoughts that don't materialize. Instead, we cherish the few that do, elevating them into something almost magical. Yet, these moments aren't merely tricks of the mind. They also reveal how deeply connected we are to the world and to each other. When a childhood friend steps off a plane you just boarded, or you discover a long-lost photograph in someone else's family album, it's as if the universe is arranging a silent meeting between two stories. In that instant, you sense something profound, that your life touches countless others in ways you can't always predict. Embracing these glimpses doesn't require belief in unseen dimensions. Instead, it invites a shift in perspective, one that values surprise over certainty and embraces wonder over skepticism. Notice how a sudden alignment of thoughts and events stirs a rush of emotion, a playful nudge from reality that reminds you to stay curious. It's in these fleeting intersections that creativity awakens, inspiring stories, art, and connections that might never have existed otherwise. So the next time you feel a coincidence brush against your mind, lean in. Let yourself marvel at how a simple coincidence can feel like a door opening to another world. In that moment, you become an explorer of possibility, wandering through a landscape where mind and matter dance together. Embrace the wonder and remember, even if there are no literal parallel universes, every coincidence is a glimpse into the infinite tapestry of reality.